And we're beginning here.
I think we are on. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Phil. How are you doing?
I am alive as a person, and that is what I can give you right now.
Hey, nope. Yeah. We're here. It is our weekly time together with
Yes.
Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil, and
Yes.
I'm Kira.
And I'm Phil. Kira, where do you live and what do you do for work?
I am the priest in charge at St. Anne's Episcopal Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Music
Mm.
City, baby.
You Music City, and you are in the very hip part of East Nashville, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, we've got some big news happening in Nashville. We've got a big software company that's coming right into town. We all got our new property assessments for our property tax, and everybody's property values, whoosh,
Way up.
way up.
So exciting to be part of an exciting town.
Yes.
That's the
there are
downside for sure.
there are pros and cons for sure. And Phil, remind me, are you in Cleveland?
Ouch. Ouch. I am not in the Mistake by the Lake. I am in the Queen City of the Midwest, the crown jewel of the Buckeye State, Cincinnati, Ohio. I work at Church of the Redeemer there. It's a church where I get to serve as rector. That's like fancy title for a priest who does stuff there, and I love it. I have a scratch on my nose. Can you see it?
Oh yeah, I can now that you're pointing.
It doesn't hurt at all, but I'm pretty sure my dog did it. I was checking his mouth earlier because he was doing something weird with his mouth, and like I was being like the at-home vet, like I was going to figure anything out. And he does this thing where like, he wasn't scratching like mad. He like taps on you. He just puts his paw out like that, and he went like that, but he just like popped me in the nose. It doesn't hurt at all, but I'm looking at myself, not at you, of course, and I can see this thing. It's really there. Anyways, Leslie's with us. Good morning, Leslie. Betsy's with us. Good morning, Betsy. And her daughter Anne is still here, which is a good, wonderful thing. Welcome.
I am going to pull up the chat and it's going to make that noise.
While you're doing that,
okay, stop there.
While you're doing that, I want to say this is going to be a scintillating episode of Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. As you know, friends, listeners, viewers, we have people. Good morning, Mary. We have people who write in questions, and sometimes you'll write a question in the chat, and we try to interact with you in that sense as best we can. Our hope is to create something like, everything you ever wanted to know about God, but we're afraid to ask. That's sort of what we hope.
The vibe. That's the vibe we're going
churchy, but like a churchy version of that. We're both church nerds, as you can tell by our garb. But today last week we were joking around. We were joking around about drugs. Of course we were joking about drugs. What else? How else should you talk about that topic? And someone actually contacted you, Kira. Is that correct? And said, could you expand on that in a more serious way? Is that correct? Is that a right way to say that?
Yeah, I will read the email, but I will omit the person's name because there's a little bit of an admission here. So but it is somebody that I know and love and care for. And I got an email saying, that he was listening to Ask a Priest. This was last week. And he said, I love the end when you brought up 420. As I like to celebrate this time of the day every once in a while, I would love to hear your take on this.
I don't understand. What's 420? I don't get it. What's funny, it's funny is like, and this is that part where you're like, okay, Phil, but really genuinely, like I've never smoked pot before. I grew up in a house with alcohol and drug addiction. And so I was really, really turned off by it. Mm-hmm. And particularly I had someone in my family who was among other things, addicted to many things, but one of them was marijuana. So the smell like really bothered me from a very young age. As did most intoxication, which we'll talk about as we move forward. But all that's to say, I knew all the lingo and all of the stuff very, very young.
Oh, wow.
But like have never done it. But like, so yeah. I know it, but I'm also like, I don't know. I know, but I don't really know. So anyway, so we were joking about last time we met, it was April 20th, 420. And I made a drug joke. And then this person was like, no, but seriously, religious people, how do you deal with that? Which I think a fair question.
Well, and I think particularly because I don't know what the laws are in Ohio right now, but a lot of states are starting to legalize cannabis and kind of, make sure it's consumed in a more regulatory way. At least here in Metro Nashville, it has been decriminalized, which means like you won't go to like jail if you are found in possession of weed, pot, marijuana, ganja, cannabis.
Look at you. Look at you knowing all the terms.
Lots of different terms for kind of what we're talking about here.
In Ohio, I believe it's also, thing is, I haven't done a lot of research on this. I think it's been decriminalized. It's definitely available for medicinal use now.
Oh, okay.
Dispensaries in Ohio.
Okay, yeah.
And I believe it's been decriminalized. Sidebar, imagine being in jail for marijuana possession and they just decriminalize marijuana on like from here on out. And you're like, how about me in here?
Well, that's definitely one of the things that I want to talk about as we talk about this topic, is the way that drug use, drug selling, drug infractions get criminalized and get policed, particularly in minority communities.
Yes. But we should start with some kind of let's have a little bit of a Bible conversation.
Yes.
First, there's no marijuana usage recorded in the Bible, just for the record, that I've noticed. There's no explicit usage, although we're pretty concerned about whatever Ezekiel was on when he saw the wheels of fire. And we have some questions about the mushrooms that were present on the Isle of Patmos when John had his revelation. But other than that, there's no actual described usage of marijuana or other drugs as far as we know. Mm-hmm. There's certainly alcohol use present.
Yes.
And I will just say, growing up, I always kind of broke things in my mind, they were broken into 3 categories, right? Maybe 4. Alcohol was something different than drugs. Mm-hmm. Tobacco and cigarettes were something different than drugs, but also very bad. Don't do them. Mm-hmm. And then there was drugs. And then among drugs, pot had this sort of reputation of not being dangerous. So they called it remember this? Gateway drug?
Gateway drug, yes.
And then there was the drugs.
Right.
Like amphetamines and barbiturates was some big thing they always talked about when I was growing up. I was like, watch out, someone's going to give you a barbiturate. Maybe. Cocaine, obviously heroin.
Heroin.
Yeah, we grew up in the 80s, you and I. So cocaine and heroin were the ones they talked about a lot. So yeah, they were broken into these different categories. And yet when we talk about trying to understand how we might understand drugs, alcohol, all these things, we try to understand how we would understand that in a biblical sense, as Christians. I think you do want to try to, I guess I'm curious as to how you've done that in your mind and in your life growing up.
Yeah, it's hard to parse out, I think culturally we kind of both grew up in the war on drugs era, in the kind of stranger danger, don't do drugs, this is your brain on drugs, and it's the, frying pan with the egg in it. And
yes. Any questions?
all of those kind of PSAs and things that we got in school. And then, in the Bible, particularly, there are a lot of warnings about drunkenness, not drinking, but drunkenness, and kind of being overuse of, probably in this instance, wine or some other kind of intoxicant. So I think there's some way that can be expanded out to other substances. There's also just kind of the theological sense that, comes out of scripture of, treating our bodies well.
Yeah.
And, your body as a kind of temple, or, that your body is not just this flesh prison, but it's part of, there's not the soul and the body, those two interact and are.
What you do to your body matters and says something about your soul. Your body and your soul, while you're here, are connected in some way, and that's worth acknowledging.
Yes. Right. So you want to, ideally, to the best of your ability, make choices that are
don't harm it.
here for don't harm it.
So I grew up Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
They drink.
Mm-hmm.
They'll smoke too, but they definitely drink. And as I said, because I grew up with alcoholism and some drug use in my family, and I was going to a very fundamentalist Lutheran Christian school and church. So I was being fed all the stuff you're talking about. Like I knew about drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Like I read about them. I understood the difference between them to some degree. And but they were all bad. Like I said, they were all bad. Like
right.
all different kinds of bad, but they're all bad. And knew they were all bad. And you don't do drugs because Nancy Reagan says not to. And listen, in my house growing up, if Nancy Reagan said something, you listened. You listened, man. So a good Christian means being a good, not doing the drugs. Drinking was okay, apparently. But again, because I saw it in a really kind of destructive way, I got really turned off by it very young. So by the time I got to high school, there was no chance of me drinking in high school. And when a friend of mine would begin going down that path, like that's the way I thought about it. Like they were going down a path. I was like, well, you go down that path of damnation. I'm going to stay here.
Exactly.
And so I really equated, I went down that road where you were talking about with the Bible of like drunkenness, revelry, debauchery, that kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically said, so that's not Christian. That's not okay.
Right.
And I felt really comfortable commingling that with my own phobias and traumas and fears. So I started to use my religious understanding, my religious philosophy as a sort of framework for why I rejected not only my use, but other people's usage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I look back now as someone who's done a little work in Al-Anon, which for those of you who don't know, who's friends and family of people who've been addicts. And I realized a lot of my behavior was really just codependency cloaked as religion, or codependency shot through a religious lens. I don't think I was being disingenuous. I was a child, and then a young man. But this was me from all of high school and college. But I worked really hard to I wouldn't do anything that would make me intoxicated, essentially. Like anything, and I wouldn't smoke cigarettes because apparently you got a high and that was not okay. My brother got me to start, you're going to love the hypocrisy here. You're going to love this. My brother got me to start smoking cigars when I was 16. He invited me into that practice. And the thing that tripped me over, that flipped it for me, was that he said, you don't do this to get a buzz. You just do it because it tastes good. Mm-hmm. And there are some people, if you smoke a big old cigar, you can get yourself a big old buzz. But if you smoke a cigar kind of chill-like, and it's not huge and you have had food in your stomach and things like that, it doesn't really have a huge thing. Like you don't notice something. So in my mind, he got me, but I was like, that's how I was able to get into that. Because it didn't break the rule.
Right, because you weren't
all intoxication.
Your
all mind altering stuff is bad. That was the thing. And then when someone would be like, well, caffeine's mind altering, I'd be like, shut up, hippie.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's
as I drank like gallons of soda, right?
I mean, that was going to be kind of my question. Like we talk about kind of mind altering substances or things that we ingest that may change our mood or change our kind of brain chemistry to some extent. And I think probably the most common drug maybe we all use or consume is probably caffeine.
Right. Yeah. So, well, how do you do? So what was and then the person in my family who was really into marijuana was like, it's an herb, man. It comes seriously. Natural. It's all natural. It comes from the ground. Like, you think God put this here so that we wouldn't use it? And I'm like, even then I was like, see, that doesn't work for me. There's a lot of things in the ground I shouldn't be ingesting. Or like, oh, like God put this on the ground. Don't you think he meant for us to like grind it up and roll it in paper and light it on fire and inhale it? No, I think that's a real big leap, actually.
Yeah. I mean, the same is true of tobacco, I guess,
Oh,
it's
totally, 100%.
yeah.
And well, and alcohol is like, I mean, technically it's, like fermentation's a natural process. It's like
Right.
God gave you these grapes. Didn't you think that don't you think he wouldn't have given you grapes if he didn't want you to let them rot and then you drink a lot of it, the rotten juice, and then until it gets too much in your bloodstream? I'm like, oh wait, hold on, this is falling apart really quickly here.
Right. So, okay, so we've kind of like
we've gone off
that as a category of like, well, it's natural, so it must be good for you or okay or allowed.
Yeah, that never flew for me. Did that ever fly for you?
No, here's the thing. I grew up in a household where both of my parents were like competitive amateur runners and athletes. And so, and like I was a swimmer, and then I was training to be a classical singer. So I really kind of was really careful about what I put in my body and how I cared for my body. And like, I grew up in a household where my parents drank fairly regularly, had a beer and pizza. And, that was like a pretty common thing. It was never like a forbidden thing.
Right.
And I think that kind of helped with my just general attitudes around alcohol, though I certainly have a lot of addiction in my family tree. Especially alcohol addiction, and kind of misuse. So, everything else, I just wasn't very interested in. I mean, I got very, very warned off of like cigarettes, which was probably maybe the most.
Well, you were singing. You were a singer.
Yeah, I was a singer. Like I needed my lungs, and then kind of the same thing with like pot, because most people smoked it at that point in time. I didn't really.
But there weren't edibles or vaping or anything like that. Right.
So I, steered. I still like. I don't. I'm a pretty straight edge. I'm a good girl. I follow the rules.
That's the thing.
I didn't ever want to do anything like illegal or bad or like risk kind of getting in trouble with the authorities. So yeah, I was a pretty good kid, and I'm still a good kid.
Thank God.
But I definitely think that over the last, I would say for me, even just like 5 years, my opinion towards cannabis has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because even like, I remember one of the times I went to the church where I'm currently the priest in charge, and I met a guy there, and he was a former parishioner, and he said like, Google or, look up my name on the internet when you get home. And he had just gotten out of prison. He had been there because he grew pot he gave it to people for free for medicinal usage.
Right.
People that had cancer, people that had bad pain issues. And I was like, that's
right.
Interesting. Like, that's not a thing that I had really thought about before. Always when people kind of said, oh, medicinal usage, I was like, yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
And you like meet someone with glaucoma or with cancer, and they're like, this is the only thing that keeps my stomach from turning into knots. And you're like, oh, what the heck is my problem?
Yeah. Or like, I can't, otherwise I don't have any appetite. And this kind of has kept my weight up and, has allowed me to go through chemo and radiation that otherwise my body would have been too weak for. So
that's always been a thing that kept me away from marijuana. Was the last thing I needed was the munchies. I was like, no one's ever been like, Phil, you need to gain a little weight. It's like never happened. So I think that's always been a turnoff for me.
Yeah. And I think as and again, kind of looking into the way that low-level drug crimes are used as excuses for policing.
Yep. Over-policing certain areas.
Over-policing certain areas for pulling people over, for searches, oh, I think I smell weed, let me.
Yeah. And knowing that certain kids got away with that and it was no big deal. And if you did it when you were a kid, you were just like needing to learn a lesson. But other kids that were a different color, but the same age did it, and they were in jail for being thugs.
Yes, exactly.
I remember my high school senior year of my prom. I went to a prominent prep school in New England my senior year of high school, and I went to prom. And I remember going into the bathroom, and there are guys at this, well-established young gentlemen on their way to some great college experience who were doing coke in the bathroom. And I was like, I got it. Me, I was, especially in high school, I was like, I got to go from here. I should not be here. No, I'll be in the ladies' room. Ladies, I'm sorry. I know this is weird, but it's less weird than being in there. I'm sorry. It was so awkward. But they didn't get in trouble.
No.
And even if they'd gotten in trouble would have been like, they might have gotten like suspended from school.
Right.
But like, so yeah, we know there's, and by the way, if you're like listening and you're not sure about this, like you can, like, it's very easy to access information about racial disparity among how crimes are punished. That the same crime perpetrated by the same two people, the same age, same everything, but different color, like literally white people get lighter sentences statistically almost every time. And so we know that's true. We know this is an issue. But I still want to go back to the Bible a little bit here.
Yeah, let's do it.
So there are traditions in our Christian faith that would say all drinking is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then again, you mentioned a sort of kind of I don't think it's a full-on prohibition against ever getting drunk ever, but I tend to look at it as like a propensity towards drunkenness, debauchery is a language they use. So this sort of like becoming this, I think, but there's language that could insinuate like, hey, just don't drink.
Yeah.
Which I would then extend to don't do drugs, right? Because by and large, that they're used for similar purposes.
Mm-hmm.
To alter your consciousness for a specific period of time, and usually for recreational purposes.
Right.
So, like, as a Christian growing up who had parents who drank, but who had some addicts around you, but you weren't like raised in a place that made you go, I'll never drink.
Yeah.
Like, how did you ever like try to square the drinking with religion, or was ever like, when did that ever come into your consciousness that they might be in conflict, or were or weren't?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, like I grew up Episcopalian, so, we had champagne at our Easter vigil after Easter vigil. Like
right.
Growing up, it was a thing that was around, but was never like a boogeyman or, right. And then, of course, but I also grew up in Texas. So I had family members who, didn't drink for Christian reasons, or, right. Had even parents, friends' parents who didn't drink for kind of religious reasons. And it was always kind of one of those things like, oh, okay, to me, like in the Episcopal Church, we wear fancy vestments and other churches don't. Like it's
right.
like an issue to me of like, oh, well, they're doing it wrong and we're doing it right. Or maybe right. We're doing it wrong and they're doing it right. I certainly think, as I've gotten to know more people who are working on their sobriety, that the kind of alcohol jokes that we make in the Episcopal Church are in pretty bad taste.
Yep. Yep. Whiskey-palians.
Yeah.
Wherever you find 4 Episcopalians, there's a 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah. All that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, like you got to have sherry after, evensong, or like right. Just the kind of constant presence of alcohol at church events. And I think, again, kind of being a Southern Episcopalian, we lean on that as a cultural marker to kind of be like, oh, we're not like those Christians. We're not like the the Baptist or the Church of Christ, you know, even though there are plenty of folks in my congregation who I know are, you know, participants in 12-step programs, are sober, who are, you know, who've been doing that for some of them for a very long time, and some of them maybe newly. And, you know, we house, like many churches do, we house 12-step groups in our church.
Totally.
And yet we kind of make these jokes about alcohol and alcoholism. And it's just, that's for me where I've been trying to square the circle.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it's very fascinating. The 12 steps, you know, Bill W. and his crew like started out, one of the people in that sort of founding circle was one of the mentors of that group was an Episcopal priest. And Episcopal churches tend to be very, very receptive to 12-step groups meeting there. And so we have a really sort of, in some ways, a really healthy relationship with 12-step programs because, you know, we don't believe in shaming people for doing that work. And we understand that for some people, the anonymity is important because of the social stigma around, you know, by the way, not a social stigma around drinking, a social stigma about not being able to handle a good drink. Like it's a very different social stigmas around addiction and anything that would be perceived as you not being able to take care of yourself, essentially. That's really what it comes down to. So I think the Episcopal Church is a tradition that has that space for grace. And so we look upon people who struggle with that, I believe, as siblings and not as sort of people beneath. At the same time, as you said, alcoholism's a problem and, you know, maybe less an issue as drug use, but as far as I know, I'm sure it happens here and there, but alcohol is very much baked into our culture. You know, here in my diocese, our beloved bishop just recently retired. And as he was walking out the door, he sent a letter about a month before he retired. He retired very suddenly within like a 2-month notice. And he was having some medical problems and he wanted to address them and take care of himself, which I thought was a good idea. But about a month before he retired, he sent out a letter to the whole diocese saying, by the way, like it comes, you know, it's now like, I'm now fully aware and acknowledging that I have a problem with alcohol was the words he used.
Mm-hmm.
And I am seeking treatment for it and doing that work. It's not the only reason I'm retiring, but it's part of it. So that's entering into the conversation in our diocese. I got to tell you, like when I'm on the standing committee, which is sort of like the, you know, I know you know what it is, but for everybody else, like it's sort of like if you're in a church, it's sort of like the vestry of the church for the diocese. Or if you don't even know what a vestry is, it's like the board of our little group of churches called Southern Ohio. And when the bishop leaves, in between bishops, that standing committee kind of runs things like a board would without a CEO or you know a vestry would without a rector in between. And so we've done some survey things and asked questions about like, did the bishop's self-described alcohol issue ever affect you negatively? And we had people who got mad at us for asking the question. How dare you ask that question? Don't try to ruin his legacy. Right? So there's that no, by the way, only a few people. It wasn't over, but that's present. How dare we talk about this thing? Talking about it is shameful. And by acknowledging the thing he said, you're trying to ruin someone's legacy, besmirch them, rather than address the systemic things that might be present. And on a broader church scheme, you know, so a lot of people don't know this, though it's very public news. About 6 or 7 years ago, there was an assisting bishop in Maryland who was drunk driving at like noon one day and ran into a cyclist and killed him and drove off. Yeah. And then when she realized what kind of like, either she realized what she'd done or she realized there was no way to run or whatever, I don't know what her decision-making process was. She came back to the scene and like got arrested and she's in jail currently, I believe. But like, so drunk driving and drinking, like, and then all sorts of stuff came out that like people kind of knew about it, but didn't want to say anything. And, there's just that dynamic that's present in our church. Yeah. And so does some, you know, and like, so the flip side is maybe having a church where it doesn't exist at all, because guess what? Those churches never have any issues with alcohol. we know that's not true, right? So yeah, I mean, I've heard jokes about like, if two Baptists are in the liquor store, they don't recognize each other,
Yeah,
right?
you pretend,
Right.
they
Never
pretend they
saw,
don't see each
never see, right.
other.
So we know that it's like it's like there's no premarital sex in the Roman Catholic Church, so no one ever has, so no one ever has sex out of wedlock. And it's like we know these things. We know that that's not quite the deal. Prohibition is not actually the thing necessarily, unless you can theologically point to why that's necessary. So I think we're struggling in our church with the larger church, not Redeemer, but the larger church, with this idea of what is alcohol, and now the question becomes like marijuana, because it's becoming so acceptable socially.
Yeah.
What do marijuana and alcohol, like what is their place in the life of the church?
Right, because we have a lot of our churches, and I think it's a national policy, right? The alcohol policy. If you have an alcoholic beverage at an event, you need to have an equally attractive non-alcoholic option. So, you can't just have like.
I have a joke for that. Locked and loaded, by the way, but go ahead.
You're not supposed to just have like all these like attractive wines and beers, and then like, oh, there's some water if you want to get it from the kitchen.
There's a drinking fountain and some cups.
Yeah.
No, I know. I always think it's funny because I'm like, to the person who wants a whiskey and soda, what's an equally attractive non-alcoholic alternative? Yeah. But I know, but the point is the same. Like that's correct. Like that like if I go to a party, and I've decided I don't want to drink at that party, and they have Diet Coke, there's no temptation for me.
You're good.
Drink. Yeah. And so this is another piece of this, right? So as we talk about this, and I kind of like that we're talking about it on a personal level. Well, I'm going to keep trying to figure out the biblical aspect, but I like talking about it on a personal level because it really is personal. It's so personal. How these things affect our lives is personal. How we understand God present in our life and all of that, like in the decisions that we make. There's something really simple about saying, here is what's prohibited and here's what is not. If you do the things that are prohibited, God will be mad at you. And if you do the things that aren't, God will be happy with you. Now go about your day.
Right.
But the reality is for so many people that, it's like some sex outside of marriage is probably totally fine with God and a holy, beautiful thing. And some sex inside of marriage can be really damaging and abusive and terrible. So it doesn't seem to be that marriage is necessarily the deciding factor on if sex is a healthy thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think alcohol, the same amount of alcohol for two separate people can mean totally different things. And so in my personal life, as I said, I didn't drink all through high school, all through college. I do drink now. And I mean, like and this is one of those tensions I have because like my friends, my colleagues, my parish, they know that I quite enjoy bourbon, that like, it's a thing that I like. I talk about it. Like, I don't preach on it.
Right.
And I don't preach while drinking it.
Right.
I have shown up for work drunk 0 times. But like, it's a part of my life now and it didn't used to be. And I will tell you that my life was simpler when it wasn't at all, when I just didn't do it.
Yeah.
When I got pulled over once in high school and I did something really dumb in the middle of the road because I was dumb, and the police, and it looked so bad, the police officer pulled me over immediately and asked if I'd been drinking.
Yeah.
And the thing was, I hadn't, because I never did. And so the answer was so easy. So even though now the answer is no, but like, you go like, well, if I had one drink 4 hours ago, have I been drinking? Well, no, but yes, but no, right? Whereas when I was a kid and I didn't drink anything, and it was great because he pulled me over and he goes, so how you doing tonight? And I was like, I'm okay. And he's like, have you been drinking? And I was like, nope. And he goes, I swear to you, the cop said, are you sure? That's how dumb my driving was, that the cop was incredulous.
Yeah.
I was like, sir, I can assure you.
That's the only reason that somebody would have done what you did.
You must have been impaired based on the decisions you just made in your driving. Nope, I plead stupidity. But anyways, my point being, when these things become a part of your life, it becomes complicated. So now alcohol is a part of my life, and I'm okay with that. But as an adult child of alcoholics who grew up in this sort of thing, I had to find a way to get okay with it. And I even wondered if even trying to become okay with it was like the addiction sneaking in, and I was one day going
Right.
to wake up and be an alcoholic.
Like, is
And
it worth it? Like, is there?
Right. And pot used to be illegal, so it was easy. Not that I never do anything illegal, as we've talked about my driving, but like seriously. But now that it's legal and people are using it and not dying or all of a sudden becoming heroin addicts, you know, I still haven't done it. But I'm like, what does this mean for us?
Yeah.
So there's complexity here.
I think there's a ton of complexity, and there's a lot of sort of personal discernment. And I do feel like it is one of those things to watch. Like I took all of January as like a dry January.
Right.
Because I'd noticed over the course of the pandemic, like my nightly glass of wine was 2 glasses of wine. Yeah. And then it wasn't just like every other day, it was every day.
Right.
And so to just kind of be like, let's break this habit a little bit. Let's like work on a check for this. Like, not that I was like addicted, you know.
No, but you were using it in a way that you look back and you're like, well, that doesn't fit.
Yeah. Or like, I just don't want to I don't want to feel like that might be a habit that's developing, and I want to kind of nip it in the bud before it does. And the same thing, you know, with any kind of like drug usage, you know, especially at this point, like legal drug usage, like, is that something that you should do before like a vestry meeting? Like, probably not. But if it's like a Saturday night and you're watching
after a vestry meeting, like, just kidding. Mostly.
You know, I mean, in some ways, like pot probably is better for you than alcohol, than drinking.
I mean, people don't just like smoke pot and then start fights.
Right.
Right. Whereas alcohol, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, it is.
If you had a sports stadium, right, where they serve no beer, only marijuana, it would be a very different game. The game played on the field might be the same, but the people in the stands would be like, "Oh, that's too bad."
Yeah, not a lot of like throwing punches at know opposing fans.
No, the fans would be like to the team to the opposite team. They'd be like, "Man, you'll do better next time. Don't get down. Don't get down. You had us on the ropes." It'd be very friendly. That's my stoned impression, which clearly proves I've never done it. I think we. But yeah, I mean, it's this, like, you're right. Like, so there's this legality issue. So from a pretty strict Christian standpoint, I definitely grew up with, if something's illegal, you don't do it.
Right. You are respectful of the civil authorities, you know, like that kind of Romans 13. You know.
Yep. I marvel now when I read that, like, Paul talking about being respectful of earthly authorities, and he's like in jail.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's
for breaking the laws, and then he's executed by the same authorities. So that's always an interesting dynamic to me, but which I don't actually think is a sidebar. From a very early age, legality wasn't the issue for me. It really was that I thought, like, these things are wrong. You shouldn't do them. Morally, they're wrong.
Wow.
So you'll like this story. In seminary, first time I ever got drunk was in seminary. So just FYI, literally, I was 30 and it was on champagne at a garden party. Is that the most Episcopalian seminary thing you've ever heard?
That's the best Episcopal, like, seminary story ever.
And like, everyone knew that I didn't drink. And so everyone was like aware of it was happening. And it, like, they were like, it just became sort of like, look at that. It's happening, everybody. Look, it's like a double rainbow, a full double rainbow. We're seeing it. We're seeing it. Someone take a picture. But anyways, it was, in seminary, I was talking to one of my New Testament professors, Kathy Grebe, who's, take the most brilliant person you know and then double it and then add 4 and you have Kathy Grebe. Like, she's just this, like, and she's like tough-minded, like, really, like, she doesn't let you get away with anything in class, right? Like, you don't get to have lazy theology. You don't get to have lazy exegesis. You don't get to like, oh, but I feel a thing.
Yeah.
Good for you. What's happening here? Like I'm pushing you all. You're getting a master's degree. We're going to do this work. And so she was also this person who was very like charitable, though. She would never let us like fall into the category of like, oh, we're Episcopalian. We think this. Those people are like that. She never got in for that. She always is very like respectful of how different traditions came to different points of view. So I remember being like, so Dr. Grebe, can you tell me, it was like, it might've been like one-on-one, or maybe one other person was there, wasn't in the middle of a class. I said, can you tell me a little bit about the biblical like basis for the idea that the wine that Jesus was drinking and that others were drinking in the New Testament wasn't alcoholic? And she was like, oh yeah, there's no basis for that in history.
Yeah.
I was like, no, but I mean, like, some people do, like, they say that it was unfermented wine. She says, no, I understand that people say that. There's no basis for that. Like, Jesus was drinking fermented grape juice. He was drinking wine. The wine at that time was wine. If you drank too much of it, you got drunk.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't grape juice. If you drank too much, you just had to go pee really bad. Like, it was an actual thing.
Got like a sugar high from the
right. So there are legitimate reasons not to drink. There are genuinely legitimate reasons from a spiritual standpoint why drinking can be problematic, unquestionably. And also, we have a tradition or stories, a narrative, where Jesus, like, where they run out of wine and Jesus makes more.
Right, at a party, at a wedding.
At a wedding party where they were all just getting hopped up on grape juice.
Yeah.
No. And Jesus connects the drinking of the wine and the Seder meal to being his own blood. And you have language, you have description in Isaiah of this sort of apocalyptic reality post reconciliation, post judgment, of a place where there's the fatted calf, rich food and good wine is being drank in heaven. So
fine wines, yeah.
Right, and heaven being described as a banquet, as a wedding banquet. So there's a place for it then, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I do think we need to be cognizant of like also just sort of the cultural realities of, not having like a lot of necessarily clean water or water treatment plants, or
right.
The things that we take for granted in terms of having easily accessible water that isn't going to kill us with bacteria if we drink it. And so, may need to be fermented to kill some of that bacteria. Yeah. But, even traveling to other parts of the world, where like, yeah, for a while, like wine was that's just the beverage that you have. And, Muslims are very strict about not drinking alcohol. And, so there's more of a like tea culture. So, there's different kind of cultural realities at play that may affect kind of how we read the Bible.
How do you think the cultural realities of sort of traditional mainstream America, like how do you think that's influenced our interpretation of these things?
Yeah, I mean, even just thinking back to, kind of the prohibition movement, and a lot of that was because women were angry that their husbands were taking the paycheck and going to the bars and drinking and not kind of coming home to their families and having grocery money and stuff like that.
Right.
So, so there's that history of like, this thing is going on, and instead of kind of maybe looking at the root causes or looking at the systems of, why people after a hard labor shift would want to relax and unwind.
Right.
It's like, well, let's just
legislate. Let's legislate more things.
Let's just legislate more things. And let's, again, kind of back to that, like, well, if you're rich, you could get it. If you knew the right people, you could, get a medicinal whiskey prescription. If you, that all the people that needed it had champagne at their parties, like it
Right.
again, like it wasn't there's a big class thing, there's a big race thing in terms of kind of who was allowed to not only legally but just kind of culturally oh, it's okay. There was I'm gonna sound old kind of. There was a TikTok going around about like things that are frowned on if you're lower class and like approved of if you're high class. And I think drinking is one of those things, right? Like it's, if we have sherry after Evensong, that's a lot different from the guy on the corner who's drinking his Colt 45 out of a paper bag, right?
One's good and one's bad. Why?
Yes.
Well, and that's the thing about, and so that, and we've been talking a lot about drinking. Like, this is the question about marijuana. Like, it feels different for me. And that's probably because of how I was raised. I mean, I have broken that boundary where drinking is now a part of my life at all. Although I would say drinking was definitely a big part of my life when I didn't drink. Alcohol had a lot of power over me when I didn't drink because I was so scared of it and because I was so traumatized by how I understood it having an effect on my life. Marijuana scares me similarly with no like clear reason why other than just that it was all connected to addiction. Yeah. And because we were raised saying these things are all illegal, they're all bad. Like, just say no. Mm-hmm. Like, I was joking earlier, but not really. Like,
right.
Genuinely, if Nancy Reagan said something, I was going to do it.
And like, that sense of like, even that marijuana as a gateway drug, like, oh, if I
smoke pot
with my friends, I'm going to end up as like a heroin addict.
That's right. No, that's right. And I've seen the video where someone takes an egg and scrambles it and says, "This is your brain on drugs." Any questions? No, I don't. I get it. I will never do this. By the way, if you like comedy and you don't mind very vulgar language, there's a comedian from the 90s. He died in the 80s and the 90s, and he died in the early 90s. Bill Hicks, who's one of the bona fide comic geniuses of the 20th century. Bona fide, brilliant. But again, very vulgar. If that makes you uncomfortable, stay away. But he was a recovering alcoholic and addict, but he talked about a lot of the things I'm saying today. I learned from him. Like, he did a whole thing about if you went to a bar and everyone was on drinking, or if you went to a bar and everyone was high, he's like, it would be a very different bar experience. It'd be much more pleasant, there'd be no fights. I mean, that was his whole joke, but he talks a lot about, like, he makes whole jokes about how the brain on drugs thing just like totally terrified a group of people. And I was one of those people. And so now I'm 41, right? I've never done this stuff. I have friends that have, they're fine.
Right.
I have friends that have, and it's an issue. I mean, at least I don't know anybody now, but like in college and stuff, you always knew they were usually guys. You usually knew those guys who were like totally smoked out and fogged out.
Yeah.
Like, couldn't remember what day it was, kind of like the Big Lebowski, like, what day is this? That's not interesting.
No. That's not a personality, actually.
Right. But you don't see like the people who threw their lives away for the reefer. Like, right. I know way more people, as you mentioned earlier, but like, I know way more people whose lives have been destroyed by their relationship with alcohol than by marijuana.
Yeah.
Or while we're at it, by like shrooms. Right. But I just added another drug to the list. And now it's like, where does it stop? Like, it's much easier to just create this line.
Yeah, I think, in a similar vein, like, I also was like, no, this is not for me. I'm not going to, right. Not going to do any of this stuff. I don't want to end up, in a bad situation. And now, as I've gotten older and I know more people who occasionally smoke pot, and by occasionally, I mean any place from like once a year to maybe like 10 times a year,
Right. Right.
or like maybe at most like once a week. Like it's not,
right. And you're like, oh, they seem to be like okay people who are okay.
Right. Like they're, responsible adults who go to work and just occasionally, late on a Friday or Saturday night, like want to kind of zone out.
Yep. So as Episcopalians, then, we're two Episcopal clergy. People are listening. They want to know if we're going to tell them it's okay or not.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say one more thing about the legality thing. I think Episcopalians have already kind of said that not everything that's legal is good and not everything that's good is legal. Although I wouldn't necessarily put recreational marijuana use on par with civil disobedience.
Right.
However, the basic premise is there that just because something's legal or illegal does not inherently decide whether it's good or not, because we believe that same-sex relationships were blessed before they were legal. Some of us did, right? So there, we know that there's that space. We would like our laws to reflect our morality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go back then to that biblical thing about the idea of us needing to take care of our bodies or trying to I think that's where we go, is like, what does it look like for you in your community to see your life? Oh my gosh, by the way, our very first conversations, when I first invited you on as a guest, we were talking about your book that you wrote.
Yeah.
We were talking about, which if you don't know, folks, it's called Pro-Choice and Christian. And it's about a Christian approach to understanding abortion and can someone be Christian and pro-choice without just being a hypocrite? And Kira masterfully argues, yes, one can, but it's actually a similar thing that you start talking about in that book, and you open up as like an ethic of life, an ethic of that is pro your body, pro life in the truest sense of the word, mm-hmm. in its fullness. So approaching alcohol, approaching drinking, drugs, anything like that, we want to approach it with that similar idea, not necessarily of like what's prohibited and what's not, but a much more complicated, but much more authentic and honest approach of like, how does this fit into my life? Does it help me to see my life and others' lives as holy and sacred? Is it a crutch? Like where does it fit, or does it not have a place in my life? Is it destructive, or does it help build up? Right? Is that a fair connection?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think there is, even just kind of thinking about like the context in which we do things. It's one thing to have a glass of bourbon with your dad while you're watching the football game, and right. That kind of you're doing it as part of the vibe.
Right.
It's not about getting drunk,
right.
or
right.
kind of, as opposed to, it's Saturday night and I'm lonely and I'm going to polish off a bottle of wine. Those, if I'm doing, if I'm with somebody, if I'm sharing food, if I'm having an experience,
right.
That's kind of a different setting than just kind of, hey, I want to escape my feelings, or I'm bored, right. or
numbing behavior.
Numb out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful.
So, but at the same time, I do think there is a little bit of room for, I'm going to make this argument, and this is why I'll never be a bishop. I think there is room for some vices.
I mean, I think the Lutheran in me agrees with you. And
I think it's hard to be a human, and we can't always do it in the healthiest, most perfect way.
Yeah.
And if there's a little thing that is not damaging other people, or then maybe
eat the cookie, man.
Yeah.
Eat the cookie. Sometimes that cookie might have pot in it, but eat the cookie. No, I mean, I mean, this is something with which I struggle for sure. And food is much more of my struggle than anything else. And it's like, on one level, are you just going to be like, yeah, man, the pandemic was really hard and you ate too much sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the thing. Okay.
Right.
There's something deep inside me that's like, no, that's shameful. Shame on you. And what if you're just like, or not shame on me? How about that, body? Like, how about that, brain? Like, what if your whole life does not have to be a constant, vigilant approach to every single thing that's going on?
Right.
Religious people can be a real downer sometimes.
Yeah.
We can be a real bummer because we're like, be careful, Jesus is coming. You know, it's like, oh my God, relax. Like, he is, but like, does he just want to get here and find a bunch of uptight religious people?
Yeah.
He did that before and it was didn't work out for him at all.
Yeah.
Right. So, and he hung out with the people who were like, yeah, let's go fishing.
Right.
But we're not going to drink on that boat.
Let's have a campfire on the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. There's got to be room. There's got to be room for being for the human experience.
Yeah. And like that vice does not have to be something that you like consume. I mean, there are people that use like Netflix binges sort of as their vice, or
how is it different? Right.
Or, shopping, or like, I think we all kind of have a little bit of our thing to some extent of, hey, today's just been a really hard day and everything's really shitty. And like, I just need to not for a moment.
Yeah. And so we're coming up on the end here. I definitely want to, because I don't think I've said this clearly enough, and I want to say it really clearly. For some people, total abstinence from drugs and alcohol is essential to their well-being.
Yes.
And it makes sense for us to create cultures that don't marginalize that, communities that don't marginalize that experience, and that we want to create opportunities for people to live however, and have communities that nurture people in wherever they are in their life. And so,
and also that the reason that somebody isn't imbibing or partaking or whatever, like that's none of your business.
There it is. I knew you were going to say that. That's yes. As soon as you started that sentence, I was like, I know how she's going to finish it. And it's so good to hear. It's not your problem.
The number of times I've been asked if I'm pregnant because I wasn't having wine at a thing.
Because you're not drinking. Are you pregnant?
Because I just didn't want wine, or I didn't.
Who are you? That's by the way, a whole other episode on, and it shouldn't take a whole hour. It's just us saying for 1 hour straight over and over again, never ask a woman if she's pregnant. Just literally an hour long of you and me. And we'll go back and forth, and then we could say it together. And then you could say it for 5 minutes, and then I could say it for 5 minutes. We could turn it into a chorus.
Yeah.
Friends, never ask a woman if she's pregnant. If she's like delivering a child in front of you, even then don't ask, because you should just know. There's literally never a situation. And here's another one. I'm ready for this. Don't assume either, and make comments as if you know that they are. Literally in any situation ever. I'm good at this now. I will talk to a woman and wait for her to bring it up, and she could be like 8 months pregnant, and she'll be like, I'm pregnant. I'll be like, oh, really? How far along?
Yeah.
Because I don't mess, man. I don't mess. You got to be never.
Yeah.
Never. That's a separate conversation that we should have another time.
But I mean, people may be on having medication, on medication that reacts poorly with alcohol. They may be struggling with addiction. They may be pregnant. Like there are a ton of reasons why somebody might not be drinking or partaking in whatever is going on.
File it under B for business, not yours.
Yeah.
Hi-oh. Before we go, what have you been listening to, Kira?
So usually I have an artist, and I think today I just have a song.
Yes. Oh, I love obsession. I love obsessions with songs.
And it is a song called Immune by Jensen McCrae.
Okay.
It is just like the perfect song for this moment.
Great. Is it about vaccinations?
It is.
I want to listen to it.
I mean, the setting is kind of vaccination related. What have you been listening to besides some Bach?
I want to look at the song before I forget. By Jensen McCrae.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. I've been listening to. I'm doing a little David Bowie lately. I was listening to Glenn Gould playing Bach's Goldberg Variations earlier. That was chilling me out, and I needed that. And then the other thing that I've been, I went down a path. Did a little Louvin Brothers, a little Solomon Burke, but there was something else I was going to tell you about. I listened to the same song like 6 times in a row the other day. What song was it? Oh no. I was going to tell you. I was like, I better tell Kira about this song that I'm listening to. Kira and I, we should start making playlists.
Yeah, we should. I was like,
oh,
every time something comes up, I would be like, I would drop this on the playlist.
You're gonna love this. This is apropos to our conversation. I went down an Amy Winehouse road the other day.
Oh, nice.
And listened to Rehab like 12 times in a row.
That is very apropos to our conversation.
I know, because it's such a good song.
It is a good song.
And there's a song on her album, Me and Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
So good. That whole album, Back to Black, it's out of control good.
It's so good, and it makes me so sad.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I like things that are really good and really heartbreaking. So there you go.
Yeah. Speaking of, just kind of addiction and how it can sort of destroy someone's life.
Yeah. There was another song too. There was a song that's not the thing. There was some song I listened to like 3 times in a row, and I was like, I gotta tell Kira about this later. And now it's gone. It's out of my memory. I hate when that happens. Oh well. So are we good for next week?
We are good for next week. But we would welcome y'all's questions, or even like my parishioners sent me like, hey, we want to hear you guys. I want to hear you guys talk on this. Like, what's your take?
Yes, we want it all. Send it our way. We want your questions, thoughts, concerns, and ideas. And Mary Betsy Leslie, and thanks for being with us today. Sorry we didn't we didn't push you too hard to ask questions today, but you're always welcome to. And thank you for the kind words, Mary and Betsy. I was really excited when you brought this up that we were going to talk about this.
Okay, I was like, uh-oh.
Well, because because it's such a part of my life, and I honestly feel like we in some ways didn't even crack this. We barely cracked the surface, because there's a whole conversation to me, like in my mind. I don't know if it's even worth having, but like about where it fits in with my spiritual journey. Like,
yeah,
spiritual journey is such a hackneyed phrase at this point, but like where, like, there's just so much more to talk about with it. It's a rich conversation, and I don't think that it's discussed enough. In alcoholic systems, silence is what's preferred, and there is still stigma about even talking about these things. How we're supposed to talk about alcohol in our line of work is so highly, it's not regulated by anything you can read, but it's regulated by social expectation. And as you said, if you show up to something and don't drink, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so there's just so many pieces to this for us to look at as Christians. So we can definitely, if anyone has any questions that follow up to this, we'll talk more if there's a good follow up to it. But at any rate, we should wrap it up. And Kira, I thank you for your time today.
Yeah, good to be with you, and good to be with all of y'all who tune in regularly. And if you're tuning in for the first time, I hope you'll come back. We'll be here next week, same time on YouTube. Ask, are you there, God? It's Kira and Phil.
We'll see what God says next week.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.